Hi everyone, this is Jewish Talk coming to you from Nassau Community College on 90.3 WHPC, also streaming live on nccradio.org. This program is later archived on Spreaker.com. Guess what? This program is repeated on Sunday evenings at 11 p.m. as well. So hi there, my name is Rabbi Perl. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This, of course, all depends on when you are listening and watching us. Gewalt, you can actually see us live. I'm waving. How can you see me? Well, go to Facebook Live, either at WHPC's page or my own at facebook.com, Anshel Pearl, and we will be more than happy to recognize you and to consider and talk about your comments. So, my friends, today I've decided to call our program Tough Talk on Tough Times. During the course of our program, we would like to address, with the eruption of anti-Israel protests on campuses, I will be discussing some of the crucial issues for all of us to consider. One of them, of course, isn't it paramount that we support free speech and allow students to protest? Another question that we hope to address is, how do I know when a protest against Israel's actions becomes anti-Semitic? Another issue that is very important, related, is where do ethics come from? And we also would like to address an issue that I started to discuss in my shul this past weekend about how to judge other people favorably. What does it mean, judge another person in a more open, understanding way? As I say good morning to Levana Lichter, welcome back, Boker Tov, to Jean Brandenstein. How do I know their names? Because they're watching on Facebook Live. I'm waving. I'm saying hello to everybody on the radio. I'm excited. I'm back. We're back. We're back here because where was I? I was nowhere, but it was Passover, and we've come back raring to go. So again, have in mind, dear friends, that today our conversation is tough talk on tough times. Let me first begin by talking about freedom. In a certain sense, to remember a little bit about what we've experienced over this past holiday of Passover. So it was on the first night of Passover where we were commanded to relate the miracles and wonders that were performed for our forefathers in Egypt. As it is written, it's well known to all of us, remember this day on which you went out of Egypt. In fact, in the Jewish tradition, every single day, not a day does not go by when we do not mention this once or twice, or maybe even 3 times, of this important idea. So, but what is freedom? Freedom, right? We're talking about freedom of speech, freedom of gathering. Freedom. What is freedom? When pressed to define this most basic human need and aspiration, we usually find ourselves explaining what freedom is not. So what do we say? Freedom is not slavery. It is not confinement. It is not inhibition. As I say good morning to Dr. Eitan Kolshevsky. So, but is that all there is to freedom? The absence of subjugation? Or is there a more positive, dynamic aspect to the state of freedom? This, by the way, will help us appreciate the more tougher subject that I will be addressing here today in reference to the campus uprisings and all the other things that are going on. The same can be asked about another much desired and little understood state, what I call rest, R-E-S-T. Rest is not a movement, not toil, not creating. But what is it? Is it merely the negation of activity, or is rest itself an active pursuit? So from the Torah perspective, it implies that it is indeed active. Even rest has an active side to it. Let me explain. In the 2nd chapter of Genesis, we read that God concluded on the 7th day the work that he had done, and he rested on the 7th day from all the work that he had done. But if God rested on the seventh day, why does the verse say that he concluded his work on the seventh day? If he was resting, wouldn't he be concluded? How can he conclude if it wouldn't be the seventh day? So our sages explain, on the seventh day, God created the final and culminating element of his creation. What did he create on the seventh day? The element of rest. What was the world lacking? Rest. With the onset of Shabbat came rest. So you see here, rest is an existent phenomenon. It's a creation, not merely the absence of work. Work is the movement from self outward, the projection of one's, you could say, of one's environment. Rest is the endeavor to focus inward, to withdraw to one's own quintessential core of one's being. So you rest, you're moving away from your regular workday activity, from your job, your profession, whatever it may be, and you're turning inwards. This is a much deeper understanding of rest. You're resting from the outside activity, and you're moving into a more quintessential aspect of oneself. So for 6 days, God projected outward, creating a universe that is outside and distinct of himself. On the seventh day of creation, he created, what does that mean? He rested. He shifted his focus inward, drawing creation back into his omnipresent being, which is really very, very much reflective in the observance of Sabbath, where we stop talking about the outside and we now rest from all of that, and we rest and look inside of ourselves. Therefore, Shabbos is a holy day, a day of heightened spiritual sensitivity, a day on which the created reality more deeply identifies with the more spiritual, supernal sources of everything. As I say good morning to Mark Pintel, good morning to you, and to Karen Dombeck. Great to have you back. So the same applies on the human level. To our weekly implementation of the divine cycle of creation in our own lives as well. So let's put it bluntly. For 6 days a week, we project outwards. We develop, we perfect the world, the God's world around us. On the Sabbath, though, we actualize our partnership with God in creation by resting, by delving into the inner essence of our own souls and the soul of creation. So Shabbos is not a day of inactivity. It's not just we turn into a couch potato, but it's a day devoted to the activity of rest. What does that mean? A day in which we endeavor to seek our own spiritual center, to better attune ourselves to self that is one with the divine essence of all. So basically, all week we think we're Grace Machas. We think we're a master of our destiny. Come Sabbath, we step back and we humble us in a certain sense of humility and say, no, I'm not. I don't think I know everything. I'm going to find out what God has to say about this world. I'm going to tune into the rest, into that aspect. True, the laws of Sabbath are replete with many forbidden activities. But in order to rest, one must cease to outwardly project. Everyone will agree that if you take 2 weeks vacation, you don't want to have your mind involved in your weekday or whatever your profession may be. You want to stop from all those activities and focus on enjoying the moment. Well, on a spiritual level, that's what Shabbos is all about. But the prohibition against work is only one aspect of the phenomenon of rest. Therefore, we can find a conceptual correlation between the defining characteristics of the Sabbath and that of Passover. On Passover, as on Sabbath, as we were explaining, we're empowered to experience a state that, on the surface, seems to have no intrinsic content of its own, being only the negation of something else. But just as Shabbos, rest, is more than the absence of toil, so too the freedom of Passover that we've just experienced and celebrated is not just not being subjugated, not being a slave to something. It's a dynamic freedom, not merely the absence of bondage. So freedom is commonly perceived as the removal of all external constraints on a person's development and self-expression. Freedom is the natural state of man. This line of reasoning implies free him of all outside forces that limit and inhibit him, and you have a free human being. Passover embodies a far more ambitious freedom. The exodus from Egypt, which marked the end of Israel's subjugation to their Egyptian enslavers, was but the first step of a 7-week journey, a 49-step climb in the conquest and the transcendence of self that culminates in our receiving of the Torah at Mount Sinai on the festival of Shavuos. It wasn't just a physical freedom, get out of here, but it was a focused from that physical freedom to a spiritual focus of what Shavuos represents. Nor does Shavuos represent even the final realization of freedom. At Sinai, we were granted the potential and the challenge to attain yet a deeper dimension of liberty and self-transcendence. Therefore, Shavuos is only the festival, it is really the only festival, I should say, that has no calendar date. The Torah designates it not as a certain day of a certain month, as with all other holidays, but as the day that follows a 7-week count from festival of Passover. So it wasn't over until it was over. Shavuos and Passover, Passover physical freedom, the spirituality of freedom of Shavuos is one connection. This is to emphasize that Shavuos is an outgrowth of Passover, and the significance of Exodus came to light, the whole purpose, only on the day that we stood at Mount Sinai. As God tells Moses at the outset of his mission to liberate the Jewish people, this is your sign that I have sent you. When you take this nation out of Egypt, you shall ultimately serve God at the mountain. So standing before Pharaoh, Moses did not merely demand in the name of God that he let my people go, but let my people go that they may serve me. What is the significance of this liberating service? It means that man, no matter how free of external constraints, is a finite creature. I know many people who have the opportunity to eventually leave prison, but they still remain in the world of constraints. There are many people who are free, but they put constraints on their thinking. They actually think they know everything. That is a person who lives in a prison of their own mind, because they fail to remember they are ultimately a finite creature, ever subject to the limits of their own nature and character. That to attain true freedom, the person must be ready to transcend his or her humanity, his or her emotional, intellectual, or even spiritual self. Who can really claim, after living so many years, that they've spiritually made it? Forget about it. That's so self-centered. To imagine that as a person gets life, that he's actually accomplished everything and knows it all, physically, spiritually, financially, whatever. And why is that? Because then when a person reaches that level that he can go on, he's now accessing the spark of godliness. And that spark of godliness that we all have is really that person's infinite and suprahuman self. The Torah, God's blueprint for life on earth, outlines the observances and the practices that enable us to realize our divine essence in our daily life, in our daily lives. The day that we left the borders of Egypt, we were free in the conventional sense. No longer could the alien taskmaster dictate what we must and may not do. We then proceeded to also free ourselves of the alien influences that constrained us from within the pagan habits and the mindset that centuries of subjugation to the deprived culture of the Egyptians that had imposed itself upon us, and our own inborn negative inclinations. Therefore, at Mount Sinai, we were empowered to strive for yet a deeper dimension of freedom, an active one, a freedom that is not just a negation of negative forces and influences, but the surmounting of our own positive psychic and behavioral patterns. Let me tell you, dear friends, there is nothing negative about our human potential, but we are capable of more, of raising our achievements to a level in relation to which yesterday's liberated self can be considered limited and subjective. Every single day, if we still stuck with our attitudes as yesterday and the day before, we are living in prison. Every day, another day, gives us a chance to liberate ourselves on many, many levels. Therefore, our sages tell us, in every generation, a person must see themselves as if they themselves have come out of Egypt. The Hebrew word for Egypt is Mitzrayim, which means Meitzar, the Hebrew word for boundaries. And the endeavor to free ourselves from yesterday's boundaries is a perpetual one. For freedom is more than the drive to escape foreign and negative inhibitors. No matter how free of them we are, we remain defined by the boundaries of self and self-definition. Therefore, coming from the great holiday of Passover, freedom is the incessant drive to pass over these boundaries, to draw on our divine, to draw on our infinite potential, to constantly overreach what we are. I share this with you, my friends, and I do thank for everyone for the beautiful comments that we're receiving on Facebook as an introduction to some of the more, what I call, tough talk or tough subject that we have to deal with in today. And let me first begin. Obviously, we know what has recently happened, the eruption of anti-Israel protests on campus. And I want to share with you, I'm open, honest, I'm telling you, I don't have all the answers. I don't pretend to have all the answers. I just want to share some of the crucial issues for us to consider. Again, these past 2 weeks have seen an eruption of anti-Israel protests on university campuses across the United States, starting at Columbia University and spreading to Yale, Northwestern, UCLA, and beyond. I am sure, just as myself, that you have been bombarded by the passionate voices on the many sides of this issue. I want to share with you, please, with your permission, allow me just to share with you to consider something, to be open-minded a little bit, just for a moment. I'm not insinuating that you're not open-minded, but I'm saying let's just sit back for a moment. And many times I say to myself and to my wonderful congregation, the power of the Sabbath that we've been discussing allows a person to step back from the rat race of the continuity of day in, day out. As I came this morning to the program, I was listening to other good people speaking about the current events of today. And one of the things that hit me is the importance that if you don't catch something at the beginning, it eventually filters down. Or more appropriate words, when the fish starts to stink, it starts to stink from the head. A lot of the problems that we're dealing with these days, specifically with the students on campuses, is because the leaders of the many universities failed morally in so many ways to come out very clearly right away at the beginning after October the 7th. The wishy-washy, we see what happened with congressional hearings in Washington, and this one had to leave, and that one should be leaving, everything else, because there was no clear moral stand and say this was absolutely evil down to the last moment to go against it. Eventually, the students took over the show. When your leaders don't have a clear moral standard, it affects the students. So please, have in mind some of these ideas I'd like you to consider. The first thing, of course, is, isn't it paramount that we support free speech and allow students to protest. Sure, free speech is a pillar of American belief and law. None of these students would be allowed to do anything like that anywhere in those countries that they are talking about. Let's be clear about that. We see what goes on in those countries when they stand up against, the whatever the leadership of any particular country that I'm talking about. You can imagine how long that would last. So free speech is a pillar of American belief and law. Even if one does not agree with another's views, protecting one's right to express them is really an axiomatic to the American ethos. But here goes, just again, dear friends, I want you to think about this. But speech that is threatening to another person or a group of people is not protected as free speech. There is no doubt that much of the rhetoric on university campuses has crossed that line. Protesters have called for Israeli cities to be bombed, for Jewish students at Columbia to be attacked by terrorists. Additionally, individual Jewish students have been targeted and physically intimidated and even violently attacked. All of this puts much of the anti-Israel protests beyond the protection of free speech. Additionally, I'd like to add, private universities such as Columbia and Northwestern can create their own policies and rules. While protecting free speech is part of the equation, creating an environment that condemns and protests against racism and discrimination is also crucial. Imagine if the KKK wanted to protest in the middle of Columbia University, chanting that blacks are not welcome here, or if anti-gay groups were calling for homosexuals to be targeted and harassed. Would any university leader stand for this? Would anyone want to attend a university that allows this? Of course not. But yes, this is happening on university campuses targeting Jews. My first thought. Another thought. Aren't these protests against Israel not Jews? We should not equate the two. Like, this is against Israel, nothing to do with Jews. The stated reason for the protests is to condemn Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza. Additionally, protesters are calling on the United States government to discontinue supporting Israel. Isn't this legitimate? Why are people saying this is anti-Semitic? Sadly, much of the rhetoric of the protests has veered into anti-Semitism against Jewish students. While the intensity of the protests increased dramatically since April 17th, they have been raging since Hamas's terror attack on Israel on October the 7th, 2023. Almost immediately after the attack happened, anti-Israel protests surfaced around the world and on university campuses. As Israel responded, and the protests grew. Since October the 7th, a study by the ADL found that 73% of Jewish college students stated that they've experienced or seen anti-Semitic incidents, ranging from anti-Semitic vandalism to threats of additional violence. Additionally, 44% of non-Jewish students also stated they have seen anti-Semitism on campus. These are astonishing numbers and show that anti-Israel hate has crossed the line to anti-Semitism. The core of the connection between anti-Israel hate and anti-Semitism is the centrality that Israel plays in Jewish identity. One cannot separate Israel from Judaism. The vast majority of the Jewish Bible describes the Jewish people's exit from slavery in Egypt to enter Israel, the Promised Land. The land of Israel is central to Judaism's sacred texts, prayers, and religious observances. Israel cannot be separated from Judaism. It's an integral part of it. Therefore, an attack on Israel is an attack against the Jewish people. This doesn't mean that one cannot disagree with specific policies of Israel. In fact, many of us support Israel, also disagree with many of Israeli policies. But once Israel is denied the very right to exist and is threatened, this becomes a personal and hateful attack on Jewish people. So, just to further this subject a little bit more, how do I know when a protest against Israel's actions becomes anti-Semitism? I want to share with you some well-known thoughts from a very famous Soviet dissident and human rights advocate, Nathan Sharansky. He has defined when criticism of Israel crosses the line to anti-Semitism. Interestingly, he calls it the 3Ds. 3Ds. First D, delegitimization. The second D, demonization. And number 3D is double standards. Let me outline it a little bit more. The first D is delegitimization. When Israel's very existence is called into question, that is anti-Semitism. One is no longer advocating for a policy change, but for, God forbid, the Jewish state's destruction. Similarly, as we've been discussing, that when we talk about this on the college campuses, similar situation when it's focused on delegitimization, that is anti-Semitic. The second D is demonization. Israel is fighting against an enemy who openly calls for its destruction, attacks civilians. And, it's just, this is the main reason that, sadly, the Palestinian civilians have been killed, injured and displaced in Gaza. Israel is forced into an incredibly difficult moral decision in this war against a very immoral enemy. So to accuse Israel of indiscriminately killing innocent people or committing genocide and other war crimes is basically demonization, and when you demonization, that is anti-Semitic. The third D, as he explains, is double standards. Israel is often criticized for actions that other nations are not. While all loss of innocent life is tragic, one has to wonder why there are protests against Israel across all the campuses when nothing was done for so many other horrible situations. There were no protests when Syria was using chemical weapons against its own people. There was no protests when Nigerian Christians were slaughtered by the Islamists. There were no protests standing up for the brave Muslim women marching in the streets against the Iranian regime. There were no protests to stand up for the Kurds or the Yazidi women and children that were used as sex slaves by the ISIS. Why not? I think I'll leave it to your own understanding. Why not? Another important aspect to our conversation is, what do these protesters want and how can we end this? Hearing from the protesters themselves, it seems like they have many conflicting agendas. Some are calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Some are calling for the United States to stop funding Israel. Many are calling for the destruction of Israel, like this protest at Northwestern University. And my friends, there are so many over there who have no idea what they're doing there in the first place. Many are also calling for a protest and hatred of America. It seems that these protesters are not only infested with anti-Semitism, but they hate everything about liberal and Western culture. Maybe this is why the Hamas in Iran have publicly supported their protests. So how do we end all of this? Certainly not by giving in to haters and those intimidating, harassing, and threatening others. all university leaders must stand strong against this hatred and make it loud and clear that these hate tactics will not succeed. I shared this with everybody last week. A duck is standing next to a busy road with cars zooming past him. While he waits for a break in the traffic, a chicken approaches him and says, "Don't do it, man! Don't do it, man! You'll never hear the end of it." It took a lot of people quite a few moments to understand my joke. But I shared the following from my hearts to yours as I address you, dear campus students across the country. Don't do it, man. You'll never hear the end of it. Because you're being used. Your self-righteousness and rage are being exploited as you support terror against Jews anywhere in the world. Instead, your sensibilities will be deadened as you partake in an orgy of hatred. When you say you want an intifada, when you shout resistance by any means necessary, you may be unwittingly losing the battle for the Palestinian people. When you call for an intifada, you become an accomplice to atrocities and murder. You encourage violence and anti-Semitism. You are being used. Wake up. You embolden those who wish to murder and take captives, as they did on October the 7th, as though that was a pathway to peace. Instead of resistance by any means necessary, imagine changing your slogan. The slogan should say, peace by any means necessary. Imagine if you told the Hamas to release the Israeli hostages and stop launching missiles so that the war could end. Guess what? Peace by any means necessary. Now, that's a slogan that we could all live by. I'm taking a look now at my Facebook posts, and go to, if you're listening on the radio and you want to see me live in the studio, I have a wonderful backdrop of WHPC. I'm honored and humbled to be able to come to you every Sunday from 8 to 9 a.m. called Jewish Talk. For those who are just joining us, and I want to say how much I appreciate your joining us both on the radio and on Facebook in so many different manners. And I also want to say thank you to all those who contributed to this station's annual fundraiser to help students with updating and upgrading their machinery and all the good things that WHPC provides young men and women as they take their place in this world. Now, this past Saturday, throughout this period until the holiday of Rosh Hashanah, every Shabbos, every Saturday, after the Mincha service, we add a section of Pirkei Avos. Pirkei Avos is one of the studies that Dr. Kolshevsky is an expert in, amongst many other things. It's the whole 6 chapters of outlining the living a life of morals and ethics. And each week, chapter 1, chapter 2, the 6 of them, it's repeated. What's interesting about this particular section of the Mishnah, it opens up by emphasizing that Moses was given the Torah at Mount Sinai. He passed it to Joshua. He passed it to his, on through the generations. It points out, as I say good morning to Robin Rosenberg, we missed you. It introduces all these living a life of ethics and moral standards by telling us the transmission that speaks about that we trace all these teachings back to Mount Sinai. And the well-known question is, why did the author of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, put this chain of transmission, emphasize this chain of transmission here? This is not the first section of the Mishnah. There are many, hundreds and hundreds of teachings beforehand. Why not introduce the entire Mishnah study with this introduction? And everything came from Mount Sinai. Would have made more sense to put this at the beginning of the Mishnah. Excuse me. Think about this. This section, chapters of the Fathers, as it's called, Pirkei Avos, is all about morals and ethics. When we study any area of all the other Mishnahs, the truth is, you can easily see, that the subjects at hand are from God's Torah. The subject matter, how it's dealt with. But when it comes to moral and ethical values, one actually can become somewhat confused and actually believe that when it comes to morals and moral standards and ethical interrelationships with people, that maybe my source of all this can come from the human world around me. Somehow that the human beings can come up with the levels of ethical standards. For this reason, explain our sages, that specifically when it comes to morals and values and ethical living, we have to emphasize very clearly that the source comes from Mount Sinai, comes from God, just like any other area of Torah, like we would talk about the Sabbath and the Passover. You see, from the world around us, there's also, the world boasts about morals and ethics and civilities. But you can see today, my friends, the results of moral standards and ethical levels when it comes from the world around us. And why have they failed, as we see on the campuses and other areas of life, where there's no boundaries anymore, because people think they're smart. They think that they can make up their own what is considered an ethical and a standard of living. See, our morals are very different from the world's. There's an emphasis that true morals must come from the Almighty God Himself, who is infinite and unchangeable, and an unchangeable wisdom. One would expect that institutions offering higher education would also be places of higher morals. In reality, we are seeing that today's colleges, universities, are unusually devoid of any morals, of ethics, and even basic civilities, more than most other places. This is because when the human mind is free of God's direction, it will go astray. We don't need a better example than Nazi Germany. We must remember that I just read, actually, tomorrow is International the Holocaust Memorial Day. That in that Wannsee conference, when a group of men got together for the final solution, God forbid, amongst those men in Nazi Germany were so many with the highest level of education, doctorates, PhDs. When a person believes in themselves, they can actually make nice mistakes, grubber mistakes, as we see so often. We must remember that our only source of good, pure, and true guidance comes from Torah, comes from God. We should be wary when someone's credentials for counseling that come from beliefs and theories that are products of warped and corrupted human minds. So let us, at this moment, remind ourselves to embrace of the great gift given to us and experience the freedom it provides when our source of living comes from Hashem. And may we be revealed in ways where we say, Atzas Hashem hi sakum. So, again, in this manner, and the highlight of our program today is tough talk on tough times. Let's continue that as well. As we all know, for the first time in history, Iran directly attacked Israel, shooting over 300 missiles and drones in a massive attack that was, thank God, repelled by Israel. The sky lit up in the night as the Israeli defense systems intercepted these targets. And we also thank Hashem for the support given by America and England and even countries closer to that area. We have witnessed the brutal massacre of October the 7th. There were violent kidnappings and the humane violation of women, virulent anti-Semitism and worldwide protests, and now unprecedented attacks as well on the land of Israel. So from where can we find the resilience to overcome this at this time? Think about this. This menacing threat arrived just as we were about to celebrate the holiday of Passover. The Haggadah that we all sat down and used at the Seder was written not as an ancient history book, but rather as a living guide to life today. As I say good morning to Jeffrey Hirsch and to Linda Zellickson and everyone joining us. As we sat at the Seder, we discovered an eternal secret. There's something special from the Seder that I came away with this year. During the Seder, we have customs that provide us with hidden meanings. You wonder how we will survive the anguish and the pain? You question the future as the darkness of the day strips us of the promises of tomorrow? Listen carefully, my friends. One of the things that we did is we made a sandwich. Passover night, we made a sandwich made of matzah, maror, and a sprinkle of charoses. This is more than just an interesting sandwich combo. In this lies a wisdom for life. Hillel, the great sage, lived in the times of the Romans when Jewish life was threatened. It is Hillel himself who instructs us to make this Seder sandwich. He guides us to navigate through the agony and the anguish just as he did. So Hillel whispers to us on the Seder night through the sandwich, and he says the following: "My children, you're not alone in this cycle of hate. I lived it as our forefathers did in Egypt. Every day we would wake up to the shouts of those who wanted to destroy us. Our babies came into this world with moror on their lips. There were many who were about to give up hope. Spirits were crushed. What will be with us? How will we ever make it out of this mess?" Hillel says to us quietly in the Seder, "Here's my formula to make it through the aching times. If you know only moror moments, you will succumb to the pain. You will wake up with fear. You will go to sleep with fear. Moror is bitter. The harsh state or taste never leaves you, and the tears do not stop flowing. The only way to survive the distress is to make a sandwich of your life. See the matzah? It is the greatest symbol of love between Hashem and all of us. In 1 second, we were lifted from slavery to freedom. That's what the matzah represents. We had no time to even let our dough rise and bake bread. Knowing that, healing, remember this, that the healing comes miraculously, just as light instantly pushes away the darkness. So, let us take the moror, the bitterness, the fears, the worries, the pain, the anxiety. Let's make a sandwich. Our hearts will be encased in matzah, a sign of how much we are beloved and cherished. Then sprinkle us some sweet charoses. Charoses, for those who may not know, is a delicious mixture of apples, grapes, juice, sugar, and walnuts. Wine as well. And recognize the sweet blessings in our lives. Let's dust our sandwich with the magic goodness that we have been granted. In this way, we will find the balance and the fortitude throughout the challenges. So we've seen miracles. Passover is an opportunity for us to stand proud and to proclaim that our inner fire is not dead. These past 6 months, we've encountered some of the greatest of our, sadnesses of our generation. Yet at the same time, ordinary people who are in fact extraordinary. We've seen angels of resilience and strength. We've heard of heartbroken voices of mothers and fathers who have buried their sons and daughters. We have watched wives stand bravely, some with new life delicately growing within, speak about the dreams they've shared with loving men who are no more. We have shed tears with children who wept bitterly as they bid farewell to their parents. Each voice has echoed the unwavering words of those who walked before us. For thousands of years, you have tried to snuff out the light of the Jewish people from this earth. There are those who schemed and plotted and planned and all kinds of stuff. But Baruch Hashem, we have endured. Remember, we continue simply to continue to go on. So as we sat at our Seder and retold our story, know that no missile in the world can ever extinguish our souls. You've tried from the beginning of time, yet here we are. Yes, we are a stubborn people. We will never relinquish our hope. We will never surrender our faith. We are determined to live. This is our story now and forever. I want to bring you to update that this coming Monday, that's tonight Sunday into Monday, is the May the 6th, of course, and corresponding to the Jewish date, it's the 28th day of Nisan. And I bring you back to 1991 on that date, April the 11th, 1991. On this very day, the Lubavitcher Rebbe issued an emotional call to all of us, to the world Jewish community. What was his call? That all of us should increase our efforts to bring Mashiach and the ultimate redemption. He spoke in a very anguished voice and couched it in very uncharacteristically personal terms. The Rebbe's words actually deeply shocked the Hasidim who were present in the synagogue, and that feeling was reverberating throughout the world. And he said the following: how is it that the redemption has not yet been attained? The Rebbe cried that despite all that has transpired and all that has been done, Mashiach is still not here. What more can I do, he said. I've done all I can to bring the world to truly demand and clamor for the redemption. The only thing that remains for me to do is to give over the matter to you. Do all that is in your power to achieve this, a most sublime and transcendent light that needs to be brought down into our world with pragmatic tools. And the Rebbe continued, rather, as I said, uncharacteristically, and said, I've done all that I can. I give it over to you. Do all that you can to bring the righteous Redeemer immediately. I've done my part. From this point on, all is in your hands. This caused quite a huge stir throughout the world. So I want to share with you briefly, what is Mashiach? I talk about redemption. What is Mashiach? Just a kind of a general introduction. You see, two of the most fundamental tenets of Jewish faith, as listed by Maimonides among the 13 principles of Jewish faith, is the belief in the ultimate redemption. What do you think the ultimate redemption is? Ladies and gentlemen, this is earth-shattering news. An awaited era of world peace. I know people can't handle that. Yes, we believe and focus and work for and desire, like all good people, a world peace. Yes, that's part of the belief in Mashiach. a world filled with prosperity and wisdom for all, and the belief that the dead will be resurrected at that time. The Messianic era will be ushered in by a Jewish leader, generally referred to as Mashiach. English generally translated as Messiah, which is the Hebrew for the word anointed one. He is an individual who comes from the family of King David. Part of his job is to rebuild the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, the ingathering of all the exiles to the Promised Land. At that time, delicacies will be a commonplace like everything else. All the nations will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift a sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. That's a quote from Micah, chapter 4. Humankind will be preoccupied with only one pursuit, to study godliness, godly wisdom. The earth will be filled with the knowledge of God as water covers the seabed. Okay, so it's going to happen. That's what we believe. But why is this so important today? Why is the coming of Mashiach so central to our belief system? Guess what? Because the Torah teaches us that there's a purpose to this world. Every human being is here as a partner with God. All of us are creating the image of God to make this world a better place. So in the Messianic era is going to be this actualization of this perfect world. Not apocalypse, I hope I'm saying it right. Not world destroyed of each other with nuclear warfare and all that kind of stuff. That's not the end. That is not the end. God forbid. The end will be a beautiful world for all of us, where all of us... In fact, I'm going to interrupt my own thought and remind you that in the 90s, a terrible anti-Semitic act happened in Warsaw. And the president of Poland wrote a letter to the Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson in Brooklyn, and he apologized for what went on over there. The Rebbe thanked him for the letter and proceeded to explain and answer an interesting question. Everything that was created in this world during the 6 days of creation came as pairs. There was continents, there were many animals, many birds, and many oceans. And when it came to mankind, it was one human being. One human being. Adam and Chava, both joined together. How come? How come God couldn't make a mass people? 10, 20, 100, 1,000. He made everything else in multiples. And the Rebbe said to the president of Poland at that time to emphasize that there's no pecking order amongst human beings. We all come from the same God. One man from one God. Yes, we all have our missions. We also have our personalities, but there's no pecking order. Each and every human being is created in the image of God. When will that be ultimately realized and revealed and happily lived by? During the Messianic era, with the coming of Mashiach. So there are those who maintain that this crass physical world is merely a strategic challenge, one that the soul must battle and transcend en route to some heavenly paradise. We're hanging out here for so many years and then forget about it. According to this line of thinking, the physical and the mundane have no intrinsic worth. You destroy other people's properties. You put other people down. Who cares? I'm going to go to heaven anyway. I'm going elsewhere. And therefore, there's retains no value. Whenever I can live what I want, I only live once. Let me eat whatever, all the different things that we talk about. That's only a person who has one focus in life, only sees themselves and only sees the physical. But if a person lives with a spiritual side as well, we realize that this world is a beautiful world. It can be made into a beautiful world when all of us work hand in hand in tandem in realizing the holiness of each other, the holiness that we have within each other, the godly soul that we have, and how all of this can make this world a beautiful home for Hashem. That is why we are looking forward, and all of us. That's why, even as Jewish belief believes in the soul's reward in the hereafter, the ultimate is down here. The refinement of this physical and infusing this world with holiness and purpose and making the mundane. Spiritual world is spiritual world. Beautiful, mazel tov. But the real deal, the real challenge is to talk nicely, to understand, to appreciate other people, and to see the holiness in this world. Not to destroy nature, not to destroy other people's property, because it's revealing holiness in this world is the paramount objective. It is the sanctification of the human body and the world at large that constitutes the very purpose of this creation. So from the dawn of time, God envisioned that this world that he created could be a dwelling place for God, for godliness. And he put us here to fashion this home. We're all, art directors, or we're all, we're here. We're all maitre d', so to speak, to be able to transform darkness into light. And soon the day will come when Hashem's glory will be revealed in this world. And each and every one of us will enjoy the fruits of our millennia-long work, the end product of our labor and love. At that time, the curtain will be ripped aside, and everybody in the world will live in peace and perceive godliness. And it will be the culmination of this master plan of goodness and kindness. So let us all act. Remember, one good deed will make such a big difference for the entire world. This is your host, Rabbi Perl. Thank you. Have a wonderful, safe week. Shalom and Am Yisrael Chai.